Hello, and welcome to the news you're never going to find in the news because the news no longer reports the news, they just follow the narrative. By me. This is number 9. Today is Friday, December 11th, 2020. But why am I never going to find this stuff in the news? Why does the news no longer report the news? What is the narrative? And then we show you this every time, right? But who tells the stories in society? We also show you this every time. But what is the social order? We also show you this. Mr. Jones, I don't have an agenda unless the truth is an agenda. So who out there doesn't have an agenda like Mr. Jones? And who is telling you the truth? We talk about this every time too. But why is all this different types of journalism needed? We also show you this every time. But why is journalism printing what someone else doesn't want printed? Why is that considered journalism? And why is everything else just public relations? Welcome to day 270. As always, don't trust me, don't trust anyone, do your own research. We only promise one thing here, and that is the truth. So what is the truth? Well, I can tell you who has zero interest in the truth. It's all these folks right here. I'm blocking MSNBC and I'm blocking Politico. So obviously today we're talking about the media. Do they report the truth? Where do you get your news from? This is something you need to start thinking about if you haven't started thinking about it already. Do you trust your news sources? Why or why not? So let's go back in time a little to 2016. Obviously, there was an election in 2016. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump. NBC News did a story about the election after Donald Trump won the election. 12 days that stunned a nation, how Hillary Clinton lost. October 28th, the biggest political scandal since Watergate. Comey, who was the FBI director at the time, informed Congress that his agency had found emails in an unrelated case, sorry, I can't read today, a probe into former Rep. Anthony Weiner, Democrat from New York, then husband of Clinton aide Huma Abedin, which appeared pertinent to the investigation into Clinton's personal email server. And he said the FBI was reviewing them. On October 31st, the FBI searches emails. Comey continued to dominate the headlines and evening newscasts. And then we have all these different headlines about the story, about the case, whatever you want to call it, from all these different news sources. November 4th, boy, I love reading WikiLeaks. So now we're talking about the hacking of Clinton campaign chair John Podesta's emails and their release via WikiLeaks. The revelations from Podesta's emails, including excerpts of Clinton's paid speech to Goldman Sachs advisors, candid criticisms of their candidate, and the memo on Bill Clinton, Inc., all fueled negative criticism. NBC News counted 145 mentions of WikiLeaks by Trump in the last month of the race. On and on and on. So they're making a big deal about that, and posthumously and at the time. November 6th, it's a totally rigged system. I think the election was on the 9th this year. Comey wasn't finished making news in the final 2 weeks of the election. FBI director just informed us, based on our review, we have not changed our conclusions that we expressed in July with respect to Secretary Clinton, because obviously she was the Secretary of State at the time. Jason Chaffetz, who is a congressman and head of the committee who worries about all this stuff from Utah at the time, tweeted about the second letter Comey had sent to Congress. So on May 3rd, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, asked Comey at a Senate hearing why he made that October 28th announcement in the first place, especially given existing Justice Department guidelines against interfering in upcoming elections. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election, but honestly, I wouldn't change the decision, said Comey, because there's this whole thing, right? We're going to have to deal with that again when we get to 2020. It's all these things, right? we have some people on one side who are saying that you can't say anything because that'll affect the election. Then you have other people on another side saying you have to. It's news. You have to. It's, the FBI, the Justice Department, they need to do their job, right? So obviously these things were put out there, and the person who was the head at the time, Mr. Comey, said, I hate the fact that I changed the election. I don't know if I did. I don't know if I didn't, but I'd hate the fact if I did. But I wouldn't change because I got to put these things out there, right? All right. So another thing that's been put out there was by the Columbia Journalism Review. Now, remember, in the world of journalism, Columbia is the gold standard. Columbia is the number one journalism school for sure in the United States. All these professional journalists, they all went to Columbia, or at least they wish they went to Columbia, because Columbia, like I said, is the gold standard. They did a review. Here's what they say. Don't blame the election on fake news, because remember the big deal about Russia and hacking and all that stuff. Blame it on the media. So let's get into this. This was done on 12/5/17. The Washington Post produced more than 50,000 stories over the 18-month period, while New York Times, CNN, and Huffington Post each published more than 30,000 stories. Presumably, not all of these were stories about the election, but each story was also likely reported by many news outlets simultaneously. So obviously they're talking about the 18th month period before the election of 2016. What did these stories talk about? They found roughly 4 times as many Clinton-related sentences that described scandals as opposed to policies, whereas Trump-related sentences were 1.5 times as likely to be about policy as scandal. Even more striking, the various Clinton-related email hacks, her use of private email server while Secretary of State, as well as DNC and John Podesta hacks. We already talked about all this stuff, right? We're finding a common theme. This is the point, right? Her use of a private email server while Secretary of State, as well as the DNC and John Podesta hacks, accounted for more sentences than all of Trump's scandals combined, 65,000 versus 40,000, and more than twice as many as they were devoted to all of her policy positions. So if you find this article and read it, you'll see that obviously the review here at Columbia University is biased to the left. I don't know how any person who's judging this with a fair mind could see that in any way, because it's obvious through what they write here that they wanted the mainstream media to focus on the policies of Clinton, and they wanted the mainstream media to focus on the scandals of Trump. But they're saying that basically happened oppositely. So to shed more light on this possibility, we conducted an in-depth analysis of a single media source, the New York Times. We chose the Times for 2 reasons. First, because its broad reach both among policy elites and ordinary citizens means that the Times has singular influence on public debates. And second, because its reputation for serious journalism implies that if the Times did not inform its readers of the issue, then it is unlikely such information was widely available anywhere. In light of stark policy choices facing voters in the 2016 election, it seems incredible that only 5 out of 150 front-page articles that the New York Times ran over the last most crucial months of the election attempted to compare the candidates' policies, while only 10 described the policies of either candidate in any detail. So obviously, we're talking about, I focused in on the last article about the last months of the election, or the last days of the election, and we're trying to focus in on this one too when it comes to that also at the same time. So same story continuing on. In this context, 10 is an interesting figure because it is also the number of front page stories the Times ran on the Hillary Clinton email scandal in just 6 days, from October 29th, the day after FBI Director James Comey announced his decision to reopen his investigation of possible wrongdoing by Clinton, through November 3rd, just 5 days before the election. When compared with the Times' overall coverage of the campaign, the intensity of focus on this one issue was extraordinary. To reiterate, in just 6 days, the New York Times ran as many cover stories about Hillary Clinton's emails as they did about all policy issues combined in the 69 days leading up to the election. And that does not include the 3 additional articles on October 18th and November 6th and November 7th, or the 2 articles on the emails taken from John Podesta. So they obviously want you to emphasize the italics there. That's their italics. This boldness underline is me, though. This intense focus on the email scandal cannot be written off as inconsequential. The Comey incident and its subsequent impact on Clinton's approval rating among undecided voters could very well have tipped the election. To me, that is the bombshell. That is the conclusion of this paper and the main importance of it. In retrospect, it seems clear that the press in general made the mistake of assuming a Clinton victory was inevitable and were setting themselves as credible critics of the next administration. Nothing wrong with that, right? Possibly this mistake arose from the failure of journalists to get out their hermetic bubble. Obviously, we always talk about the media elites, they live in basically 90, however many percent of them live in Manhattan and live in that bubble amongst themselves. They never get out into real America, right? Possibly it was their misinterpretation of available polling data, which showed all along that a Trump victory, albeit unlikely, was far from inconceivable. And we obviously saw that happen again this year. So let's go back to 2020. So what happened at the end of 2020? A few months or days or weeks or however you want to characterize it before the election of 2020. This popped out in the New York Post. Revealed, so it came out on October 14th, if you can see it there. Revealed Ukrainian executive thanked Hunter Biden for opportunity to meet Veep Dad, Vice President Dad, right? Biden's secret emails. So obviously this was a huge deal, right? But here's what happened. So Reason Magazine says, the media do not want you to read, share, or discuss the New York Post's Hunter Biden scoop. Journalists should correct the story rather than pretend it doesn't exist. So this is how they reacted this time. Remember, last time they reacted how? They reported everything, right? This time, let's see what happens. So from that article I just showed you a picture of in the previous slide, it's a story that merits the attention of other journalists, political operatives, national security experts, and also the public at large. Not least of all because there are serious questions about its accuracy, reliability, and sourcing. And yet many in the media are choosing not to just ignore the story, but to actively encourage others to suppress any discussion of it. Indeed, 2 mainstream reporters who acknowledged and criticized the Post's scoop, the New York Times' Maggie Haberman and Politico's Jake Sherman, faced thunderous denunciation on Twitter from Democratic partisans simply for discussing the story. Remember, the media, the Columbia Review, sorry, I spit on my screen there. The Columbia Review, these people, these journalists, that was like a paper coming down from God, right? Because Columbia is the gold standard in journalism, saying, you are the ones who lost the election for Clinton because you reported these stories on Clinton, these scandals on Clinton. It's all your fault. Do they want that to happen again? Of course not. This is my editorializing of the situation, but it's beyond obvious. So these people are being destroyed for even giving this any weight in any way, shape, or form, even questioning it, even just putting it on a tweet and questioning it critically, as you can see, and criticize in parentheses there. Center for American Progress President Neera Tanden accused Haberman of promoting disinformation, and New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg told Sherman that he was helping nefarious conservative activists launder this bull bleep into the news cycle. Historian Kevin Kruse asked why they were amplifying the story. Note that both Haberman and Sherman raised serious questions about the veracity of the story, questions that certainly deserve answers. But it didn't stop there. Twitter, Facebook censor post over Hunter Biden expose. This is from the Post, as you can see, trending now on New York Post. So they're put out the story, and then later they're saying, hey, this is what's going on. Whoops, sorry. But as we already know, if you follow the story in any way, shape, or form, Jack Dorsey says the New York Post Twitter account will remain locked until it deletes the original tweet featuring its Hunter Biden story. So that New York Post article that I showed you with the Bidens on the cover, they were not going to unlock their account until they deleted that tweet about that story. And then that became the story, right? The media, especially conservative media, went nuts. Even Congress went nuts. The Senate brought these guys in, Jack Dorsey, Zuckerberg, however many other social media guys, probably a Google guy, talking about, hey, what the heck are you guys doing before the election? I don't know if you missed that, but that happened too. This was a big deal, right? So how did the media respond, other than the media that we just talked about, to all of this? So here's a thread from our contributor of the day. His name is Drew Holden. So let's go through this thread by Mr. Holden. The Hunter Biden story broke 2 months ago. Most of the media ignored it or called it Russian disinformation. How funny is that, right? Despite no evidence that it was. Funny in light of 2016 when it comes to Russia, of course, right? Now that the election is over, the story, it seems, is fit to print. Who's up for a little before and after? You'll remember that one of the key players in all of this was Tony Bobulinski, a former business associate of Hunter's. Well, you might not if you've read only CNN. As of last night, they'd never mentioned him, but their homepage featured Hunter and China. Funny that. So he searched for Bobulinski and there was nothing. Feds investigating Hunter Biden China business dealings. So that's before, I'm assuming, right? Here we go. And surely you'll remember that CNN had former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper on the program to say that the Post's reporting that blew the lid off of the Biden family corruption in the first place was classic textbook Soviet Russian tradecraft back in October, right? To me, this is just classic textbook Russian blah, 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 right? You see the tweets, Justin, President Biden's son, Hunter, say he's facing tax penalty, blah, blah, blah. So basically what he did was everything on the left that you see here is all the befores, and everything on the right are the afters. So you couldn't find anything about Bobulinski before. They're talking about Russian tradecraft before, and all of a sudden they're saying that the feds are investigating after the election, right? Before the election, this is Russian baloney. After the election, hey, we're actually going to give this story, actually report it, give it credence, right? The richest may be NPR. Now remember, NPR is funded by us, the American taxpayer. So, you know that you would think they would represent all American taxpayers, but obviously not. The richest may be NPR. Back in October, they didn't say a peep about Hunter because, I kid you not, they don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. Apparently now it is a story. So on the left, the before, it says, why haven't you seen any stories from NPR about the New York Post Hunter Biden story? Read more in this week's newsletter. So it says down there in the dark black print, we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, and we don't want to waste the listeners and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. But now, after the election on the 9th of December, NPR has reached out to U.S. Attorney Office in Delaware and will update accordingly. Hunter Biden under federal investigation for tax matter. So it's no longer a distraction, I guess, now that the election's over. Put out a piece. So, and apparently now it's a story. They put out a piece back in October about how 50 former, so now they're talking about Politico. I don't know where I missed, sorry. So Politico, I guess, put out a piece back in October about 50 former senior intel officers said it might be Russian disinfo. It's funny how everybody's reading the same narrative. It's almost like they read the same paper that's sent to them by the same person or group of people to follow, to almost as marching orders, other than please give me a better explanation if that's not the case. Today they used the same picture of Hunter to report about Hunter's corruption. So on the left, 50 former senior intelligence officers before the election say it's definitely Russian information operation. On the right, using the same picture, there's an investigation into foreign ties, possible money laundering after the election. Bonus on Politico, reminder that back in October they quoted a Biden advisor to make the case that allegations against Hunter were Russian disinformation. Not exactly profiles and courage stuff here. So as you can see, those are Politico.com stories. I've literally never heard of this guy in my life, former Pentagon official and Biden advisor. This is a Russian disinformation operation. Doesn't matter if you're the media, you're an advisor, you're someone who used to work in national intelligence, you're all speaking the same narrative. Interesting. One of the most egregious displays was CBS News, who got upset with one of their reporters for daring to ask about Hunter Biden in October. But all of a sudden, he see it as a valuable story a couple of months later. So there you go. This gentleman, the CBS News reporter, asked Biden about it at an airport tarmac. I think I remember seeing the video about it, but he was reprimanded in public by Joe Biden for asking the question. And then whoever Mr. Carbine Sabia is, he's got a blue check mark, so he must be important, right? He should be fired immediately. He deleted the tweet, but I did him a favor of saving it for him. Wow. CBS News stand behind this journalism, but Carmine is trying to destroy someone's life. Journalism? That's a big no on that one. So now all of a sudden, CBS, I wonder what Mr. Carmine thinks about that question. If he thinks that CBS News, the whole operation should go away since now they're reporting it. I want to pause here to make something abundantly clear. The reason the Hunter story didn't earn the attention it should have, is because the media actively spread a conspiracy theory that it was Russian disinformation in the days leading up to the election. That's it. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Here's NewsHour, PBS NewsHour, another publicly funded by us, the U.S. taxpayer organization that should obviously represent the U.S. taxpayer, not the narrative, but it does. Doing an about face on Hunter's impropriety with no recognition of how we got here. So on the left, before, likely Russian disinformation. There you go. Shocker again, of course. And now, tax affairs are under federal investigation. You'd assume the New York Times would find their way here. All right. Russian disinformation before the election. And now it's a legit story after the election. And I almost appreciate the hustle from MSNBC, who have continued to go to bat for Hunter through all of this, even though their tone has, well, changed a touch. So on the left, obvious Russian plot. On the right, after the election. We really know very little on this point. In fact, there's no clarity on whether this is a criminal or a civil investigation, discussing the lack of detail surrounding the DOJ probe into Hunter Biden's taxes. So now all of a sudden it's not our obvious Russian plot. Interesting. And it doesn't look like their top talent, Joy Reid and Rachel Maddow, have thought it important to revisit their earlier claims, which weren't exactly spot on. So there's Joy Reid on the left before the election tweeting. I'm looking for the word Russia in there, but I don't see it. Obviously, the word conspiracy is there. miasma of scandal obscure the Trump family scandal fest, of course. So on the right, that's still before Trump embraces reported Russian anti-Biden disinfo campaign, of course. Perhaps now would be a good time to update the fact check Washington Post, because the Washington Post fact checker says Hunter Biden's alleged laptop was not a thing before the election. But all of a sudden, after an election, they're happy to report that Hunter Biden reveals he is under federal investigation. By the way, there was a story by CNN where they had called their lawyer. CNN had called Hunter Biden's lawyer before Wednesday, because I think it was Wednesday where Biden revealed he was under federal investigation. But even before that, CNN had called Biden's lawyer asking him about if he was under investigation or not. So then it was either Monday or Tuesday where they asked him that, and then Wednesday he announced it. So CNN knew. It's not like Biden came out and all of a sudden everybody knew. But that's just a little aside. This from Business Insider is a doozy. U.S. spies say the Hunter Biden email controversy shows how exploitable and grotesquely vulnerable Trump and Giuliani are to Russian intelligence before the election. Then after, of course, Hunter Biden says federal prosecutors are investigating his taxes. All of a sudden, comes out of the horse's mouth. It's legit. But like I said, they knew before anyway. Interesting to see USA Today say that this news puts Hunter's finances back in the spotlight, when back in October, the only spotlight they gave them was to call them Russian disinformation, wrongly, of course. So there you go on the left. Before the campaign or the election, we have Russian disinformation. On the right, after the campaign, it's legit, right? Business dealings in Ukraine and China. Federal investigators making it legit all of a sudden. Now, the media isn't omniscient. We shouldn't have expected they would know about the FBI investigation. That isn't the problem. But they did. The problem is the absolute absence of interest in this story. The media didn't just ignore it, they actively undermined it. I've got a whole separate thread on the Russian disinfo stuff linked here. The allegations, which have since been shot through, were even more thinly sourced than the Hunter story. Yet tons of outlets ran with them. Twitter and Facebook blackballed the piece. So what he's saying there is that we're back to 2016, right? When the whole Russian hacked the election scandal, and then we had the Mueller investigation, and how many years and how many millions, billions, whatever, the monstrously high amount of money it costs to do that investigation that, as he said there, we all know was a hoax. We all know was a bunch of baloney. We all know was shot through tons of times, but yet the media reported it, made the biggest deal out of it, like it was guaranteed for sure 100% true, when we all know now it wasn't. And Drew himself said he put a thread out about how it's all fake, how it was all fake from the beginning. Twitter and Facebook blackballed the piece, he says. So he's just kind of doing this, kind of showing the thread that he put out that was blackballed, essentially. But now, with the election in the rearview mirror, they're interested in Hunter's impropriety. Where was this before? Where was this interest when Biden said during the debates that Hunter did everything above board? The fact checkers were mysteriously absent from that one. I mean, people knew this was happening. There's been multiple pieces in the New Yorker that talked about Hunter Biden and his dealings in 2019. I think the year before that, there was another one about the Biden family. We all know the bunch of different things going on with the Biden family, including Joe Biden's brother. You can look all that stuff up if you want, because it's there. But now with the election in the rearview mirror, they're interested in Hunter's impropriety. Where was this before? Where was this interest when Biden said during the debates that Hunter did? I already read that, sorry. So he's just talking about more tweets about how 2016, essentially, right? And of course, the richest part of it all, The richest part of all this is that many of these outlets and individuals are the same people who pushed the idea that perhaps Donald Trump had been a Russian agent since the 1980s. True, true, and true. So I don't want to hear it. This was bad faith all the way down, and it was done deliberately, not to upset what these folks thought would be a surefire Biden win in the election. It stinks to high heavens, and we should all be outraged. I'll be honest, guys, I'm on vacation this week. He just kind of talks about it. He just says, hey, I took a lot of time to do this. If you feel like it, donate to a food bank in Washington, D.C., because that's where he lives. So, of course, we're on this theme, right? There's a lot of theories out there that Hillary orchestrated the collusion hoax to distract from her emails, according to Russian intelligence. So we're coming full circle, right? We're coming full circle. But check this out. There's a gentleman here. His name is Steve Cole. All right. Steve Cole, they say that he's a writer for the New Yorker. But here's what Steve Cole really is. He is currently the dean of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. So he is the king of all media in regards to how these people, the national media, think about media, right? They all went to Columbia, or they all wanted to go to Columbia. And this guy is the king of the King's College in this way that I'm speaking. All right? So listen closely to what this gentleman says.
A question, and just to pick up your point, the homogeneity.
So sorry, I should set this up. He was just asked a bunch of super crazy long question about how Facebook and Twitter and the media work and how essentially they can't control the narrative. They put out everything that they put out on their side, of course, but there's still tons of people out there that voted for Trump. There's still tons of people out there that don't watch every single show that they put out there or read every article that they put out there. They actually think for themselves instead of follow the narrative. So she basically wants to know, like, what do we do about that? And so here's his response.
Of the media in the 60s and 70s obviously wasn't all a good thing, and it was ripe for disruption, and it has been disrupted, and Facebook is one of the big disruptors. I read a pretty good book this year called Facebook, The Inside Story, which was a very well-reported inside account of Facebook searching for the answer to the question you've asked. And I came away with the conclusion that the problems that we face, this is a private corporation that is motivated, as all companies are, to make money, that is acting as a kind of public square. And to expect that it is going to adjust its motivations to preserve democracy or to do the right thing all of the time, it's just naive. It's not what it's built to do. And the history of Facebook that's described in this narrative is one of continually breaking things and then trying to fix them partially and getting better and better at apologizing. But I came away from it thinking, it's a structure. It is not something that can be changed except by changing the structure of it. And yes, Facebook has moved somewhat. They had a better election in 2020 than they did in 2016. They've learned to put some brakes on, here and there. But you can't get away from the fact that their mission is to connect everybody in the world. That's what motivates Mark Zuckerberg, and it's his passion, and he profoundly believes in free speech. And those of us in journalism have to come to terms with the fact that free speech, a principle that we hold sacred, is being weaponized against the principles of journalism. And what do we do about that? I just say, as reporters, we kind of march into this war with our facts nobly shouldered as if they were going to win the day. And what we're seeing is that because of the scale of this alternate reality that you've been talking about, our facts, our principles, our scientific method, it isn't enough. So what do we?
So what do we do about
A
that?
question. And just to, pick up
Let
your
me try to get to this next slide here. That would be nice. So what did he just say? He talked about disruption of the media, which we talk about at the beginning of end of every single one of our shows. Controlling the public square. He's talking about how Facebook controls the public square. He's talking about how he said there's a typo. They had a better election in 2020. Talking about Facebook. Facebook had an election in 2016 and they did better in 2020. Facebook had an election. And then he talked about an alternative reality. To me, this is all about the narrative. So what he said is not in parentheses. What I'm saying now is, or what I put in there is in parentheses. Notice how he said our facts, our principles, our scientific method. It isn't enough. So what do we do? He didn't say the facts, the scientific method. Again, to me, this goes back to the narrative. He also said free speech is being weaponized against the principles of journalism. What do we do about that? Here's my editorial opinion. No, free speech does not follow the narrative. Free speech can go in whatever direction it wants to go in. And I know you hate that. So this is me continuing on. Can you see how important this supreme narrative is to these people? The narrative is not for you, it is for them. They want to control you. As we said at the top, controlling the public square. He obviously doesn't like that Facebook controls the public square. They want to control the public square with their narrative. Remember, the problem with Zuckerberg is that he loves free speech. He's not controlling the public square. I would disagree with that, but not enough, obviously, in his mind. All right. They want you to believe everything they believe. The narrative is not the truth. It's about their truth, which is not the truth. You need to find journalists and sources that do not follow the narrative and only have one agenda. And that agenda is the truth. You need to find those journalists, those publications like Mr. Jones, who really don't have an agenda unless you call the truth an agenda. Because if you don't, this is what you're in. You are in an abusive relationship because you are with a group of people who want to dismiss your opinions. They want to gaslight you. This isn't what they want to do. This is what they do. They dismiss your opinions. They don't care about your opinions. They only care about theirs. They will gaslight you. They will challenge your memory of events and make you doubt yourself. Definitely do that. They call your names or shame you for being stupid or selfish. They not only do that, they know in their minds that you are stupid and selfish. Oh my gosh. They tell you that you're crazy and that no one agrees with you. If you go against their narrative, there is no doubt that happens. They don't allow you to question it. Obviously, he doesn't want you in that previous interview and that statement that he made. He doesn't want you to question it. He doesn't want to give you free speech. He wants you to follow one thing. They tell you what is good for your own good and that they know better. I think I've already thoroughly explained that. They punish you for breaking the rules, but the rules keep changing. There's no doubt. The rules changed from 2016 to 2020. I displayed that. Apparently, it's very apparent now. They monitor everything you do. Well, this kind of goes back into the world of government, right? So this can definitely apply to government, but it also can apply to journalism and the media and the narrative. They want to know what you're doing, of course. I mean, they want to report what you're doing. Control what you read, watch, and say. That is obvious. Control the finances or won't let you work. Well, The government's doing that, and they are the one who's propagating it, right? They're the ones, you go to their channels and you see everywhere you go about how dangerous it is to go anywhere or do anything. They may not be the ones enforcing it, but they're the ones who are propagating it in every way, shape, and form. Monitor your phone or emails. Well, they want to know what you're saying. They want to know what you're emailing. There's no doubt that they want to know. Obviously, the government does those things. The big tech does those things. They're all in cahoots. Tell you what to wear. Well, they have obviously fashion sections, right? And kind of showing you what's the hot trends, right? Not a big deal, but hey, won't let you go without permission. There's no doubt about that. The government obviously does that, but they back up every single thing that the government says in terms of they won't let you go out without permission. They don't want you to go out without their permission. Stop you from seeing friends and family goes along the same lines. You already know. Play the victim. If things go wrong, it's all your fault. Remember, after 2016, the media, it was hard for them to figure out that it was their fault. Might have been their fault, might not have been their fault. There was a lot of different things going on there, but they definitely didn't want to point the finger at themselves. They wanted to point the finger in every direction they could possibly point it. So, hey, keep with the mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, but know that you are in an abusive relationship. That's all, folks. You have been listening to the news you're never going to find in the news, because the news no longer reports the news. They just follow the narrative. Hopefully you know a little bit more about what the heck that means. So in the end, do they report the truth? You need to know where you get your news from. You need to know whether to trust or not trust your news sources. And you need to know exactly why or exactly why not you trust them or you don't trust them. And if you don't, you need to find some sources that you can. Thank you for helping us upset the social order. Thank you for helping us push back against the narrative. Hopefully we were able to fulfill our one and only promise. The truth, as always, do not trust me. Do not trust anyone. Do your own research, because I'm probably doing nothing more than just spitting in the wind.